So thank you for joining us today, everybody. My name's Kathy, and today we're going to have Recipe Club with Rash. He's cooking us Pakora. And before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I extend my respects to everybody around the world joining us here today. So welcome, Rash.
Hey, Kathy, good morning. I guess good morning for us, but good everything to everyone. It sounds like we've got folks from all around the world. I was just scrolling through, which is awesome. So thanks for joining, guys, and thanks for having me back, Kathy. All right, so we're going to be making pakoras today. I'm guessing folks know what it is because one of the lady that requested it, hopefully she's on the call. I forget who it was. Hey, Midori. I think it was Suzanne who requested it. So, but pakoras are fritters, basically. They are vegan, so they don't have egg in the batter like traditional sort of fritters do. But then it's Indian, so it's got a bunch of different spices, and we're going to go through that. And it doesn't just use plain flour; it uses a different type of flour, and I'll walk through that as well. So we'll get started with the ingredients. We'll do our dry ingredients first, because I think that's just going to be quick and easy, and then we'll set that aside and get into the wet ingredients. So the dry ingredients are the batter, if you like. I'm just going to switch cameras so you can see what I've got in front of me. Bear with me a tick. Hopefully it's that one. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got first and foremost chickpea flour or besan. So it's basically got a nutty sort of a fragrance to it, which is why, oh, actually, I just realized I should probably switch. Bear with me a sec. I'm just going to share screen. I'm going to go back to just so that you can see me while I show you the ingredients. Do I have the sharing rights by any chance, Kathy?
You do.
I do, yes.
Yeah.
No, you're right, you're right. It was staring right back at me and I couldn't see it. You're all good.
They just like to keep us on our toes.
Hardly. It's actually me trying to keep myself on my toes. Okay, so here we go. So again, besan flour or chickpea flour. So it's really got a nice nutty sort of background flavor to it, which is why it's great to use with a lot of different things, but it's particularly great for pakora. So that we have here, I've got 150 grams worth of it. And then here I've got rice flour. So the rice flour is really there to give it that crispy, crunchy feel, better than plain flour. You could also use, other types of flour like tapioca flour and stuff, but you want that crunch, or even corn flour if you like. And so that's going to go in. So that's 150 grams of the besan, and that's 75 grams of the rice flour. So that's just going to go right on top. And I'm going to set him aside. And then I've also got 3 teaspoons of baking powder. Now you could use baking soda, you just need to quarter it. So that would be about 2/3 of a teaspoon, I believe, if I'm doing my math right. But basically 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. So 1 teaspoon of baking powder is to 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. So I've got 3, so you can do 3/4 baking soda instead if you have that or prefer that. I like baking powder because it's just not as strong as baking soda. So we have that. Now that's going to get mixed up in a bowl, and I'm just going to set him aside. Now the other things I've got here, as well as you can see, I'm going to walk through them in a second. I'm also going to put into this flour batter mix, if you like, and then we're going to set him aside and come back to him a bit later on. So I'm just mixing that in to make sure that baking powder is sort of getting all the way in there. I'm going to talk through these first, and then we're going to throw that in there as well. So first up, I've got, hopefully you can see these. This here is Carom Seeds or ajwain seeds. So it's really helpful when cooking with chickpea flour, just because it helps with digestion, particularly with fried foods, and then also particularly with chickpea flour. So that's just why I have that in there. It's got like when you bite into it, it's numbing sensation in the mouth. So you don't want too much, but we're making quite a bit of pakora today. So that's about, I believe it's 1.5 teaspoons of carom seed. Then we've got garam masala. So I've just got my standard stock garam masala. I've got 3 teaspoons of that to go into the batter. Then I've got, now this one's a tricky one. This here is dry pomegranate powder. You could always substitute it. So I've got 1.5 teaspoons of that as well. You can always substitute it with amchur or mango powder, again, another Indian ingredient. If you don't have that, that's okay too. You can always just throw some lime juice in. So about 1.5 teaspoons. So we're talking about probably 2 teaspoons of fresh lime or lemon juice that you add later on. So you wouldn't add it in here, you'd add it into the wet mix, which we'll talk through in a second. Kashmiri chili powder. So that's again another 1.5 teaspoons. That doesn't have a lot of heat to it. It does have it's not spicy at all. It's a little bit spicy, but it's not as spicy as like cayenne pepper or anything like that. So just a little bit of that. Optional, of course. If you don't want it, just omit it in case you don't like spice in your food. And finally, turmeric powder. So that's again 1.5 teaspoons of that. Now in the middle here, you'll see this little green leaves. This is fenugreek leaves or methi. Now you may not necessarily have fenugreek leaves, but if you can get your hands on fenugreek powder, you could throw a pinch of that in, like a pinch at the most. Like you wouldn't want more than that because it is quite bitter, and we do want that bitterness, but we don't want it to overtake the dish. So a pinch would be plenty. But if you have the leaves are nice because it also gives a nice texture and green color to the batter as well. So all of that's going to go in here. I'm just going to topple him in. All right, so we're going to move on to the wet stuff. So that's the flour. I'm just going to put it aside. We'll come back to it and throw it on top of the wet ingredients in a second. I'm going to pop him away as well. And we're going to go through the wet ingredients, lots of wet ingredients. It's going to make some space. So I'm going to be putting everything like right in front of you, and then I'm going to have my bowl propped up in the back just to keep me honest. I might actually go through the ingredients really quickly and then switch to the top camera so you can see me pop everything into the bowl. So we've got a lot of stuff going on over here. We're going to start with the shallots. Hopefully that, yes, let me do that for a second. So here are the shallots. I have the salt sitting on top of it. That's 3 teaspoons of salt. So we're going to actually go in with the onions and the salt first. And I'm just going to put that in the bowl because we'll start with that, but I'll go through the rest of the ingredients. We also have half a tablespoon of garlic and half a tablespoon of ginger. So I've got a little bit more than that because I like that sort of gingery, garlicky flavor in the pakora, but half a tablespoon should cut it. If you don't want to go through the work of chopping, you can always buy the mint stuff from the grocery store, but I actually like to use pakora as a way to make a snack with things that are left over in the fridge. So it's a really good way to make a sustainable snack because what I'll show you in a second is some of the spinach I have looks really like it's on its last legs. It looks really sad. And so the same goes for everything else that I'm using here. So I've had some garlic that I've salvaged. It was starting to, you know how sometimes garlic, if you keep it for too long, it starts to shoot up the green bits. So long as it's still got some juice in it and it's still fresh in that way, you can totally cut everything else around it and chop it up and use it rather than just throwing it or composting it. That way you still get some use out of it because you've spent money on it. So that's garlic and ginger that's going in. The next thing I've got here is, you can see the green chilies, and then I've got red chilies. So these are your standard red cayenne fresh chilies that you get in the grocers. The green chilies are Thai chilies or Indian chilies. The green chilies are actually especially spicy. So you can totally omit it all if you don't want to use any chili at all, or you can maybe just go with the cayenne, but I like the green sliced really thin. When you bite into the pakora, it gives a little bit of a chili bite, which is really nice. So I have so the green chili was itty bitty small. It was about that big, and then your cayenne peppers are the bigger ones. They're standard size. So chopped up even with the cayenne pepper toward the stalk at the top. I've actually even cut it further. So I've halved it, if you can see this. So just to make it into bite size, what we're looking for with pakoras as much as possible is to chop everything up to be as small as possible so that when you throw the batter into the oil, it sticks to each other. Because if it's too big, then it starts to kind of take a weird shape. So then we've got mint leaves. So that's just a tablespoon's worth that I just chopped up roughly. That's going to give that nice freshness in the pakora, as would the coriander. So mint will be more sort of fresh and zingy, and coriander will be more sweet and sort of springy, if you like. It just always has that nice freshness. Now I know Kathy, not a big fan of coriander, totally exclude it if you don't like it. And that goes for all the ingredients here. And the ones that I've just talked through there, the base ingredients. So your sort of aromatics, your ginger, garlic, mint, coriander, and onions. And I've used shallots, just to be clear, red shallots, and it's better to use shallots, banana shallots, any of those sorts of French shallots, if you have that, instead of onions, because onions again become quite oniony. We just kind of want that mellow flavor going on for those guys. So now we're going to move into, oh, go ahead.
Could you use red onions?
You could, but you would just use very so this here is about 100 grams worth of shallots. I'd probably go somewhere between 50 to 75 max, because red Spanish onions are really, they're sweet, but they're also really oniony. And so that's where I'd even recommend going with brown onions as well, if you don't want the sweetness. But that's where shallots kind of have the onion flavor without the onion kick. Now, the other thing you could use is spring onions, but just you could use all of it. But in terms of the onion flavor, they again serve to have that really subtle oniony, not so strong onion flavor. But yeah, it's honestly, it's what's in the fridge that you really kind of want to get rid of, don't want to throw away. But I mean, traditionally shallots, that's the one to use, red shallots. But you can always, who's to say you can't, use whatever you have available or prefer, frankly. Some people like spring onions. So yeah, go with what you like. But yeah, good question, Kathy. With that, so those were the aromatics and the sort of the base ingredients is what I like to call it, because you can't make pakora without that stuff. You definitely need that stuff. And then you've got the optional stuff. So here I've got potatoes. So I've just shredded this up with a grater. So and that starch is starting to come out, which is going to help the crunchiness as well. Now you'll see that there's quite a bit of liquid in there, so we'll talk about that a little bit later, because sorry, I should probably do it like that. So you can see there's a little bit of liquid in there. Now we're gonna have to adjust the water based on the amount of liquid that's in the vegetables. Otherwise, we want like a pancake consistency batter, nothing runnier than that. Maybe even thicker is better than pancake, because when you throw it into the hot oil, if it's too watery, it'll just spread everywhere. So if we have enough water in the vegetables that lends itself to the batter, then we reduce the amount of water that actually goes into the batter on top of it. So that's with the potatoes. So I've got potatoes today, and then I've got, like as I mentioned, some really, not the best looking spinach. It's still totally fresh. I've washed it. It's fine. But what the sort of the really good part about frying it means that you kind of almost kill all the germs that come with it. And I say germs, the term loosely, but basically it just works really well to crispen up, because when you fry stuff, it just kind of gives it that sort of zing. And then also it gives you an opportunity to use vegetables that aren't maybe something you want to eat fresh. And so that way you kind of give them a second lease on life, if you like. Now, the third one here I have is eggplant. It's soaking in salt water, because that's a trick with eggplant. I'm going to drain the water, of course, but basically once you've chopped eggplant and you don't want it to go brown immediately, you soak it in salt water until you're ready to use it. I'm sure most of you know that, but I just wanted to call out that it's got water in there that I'm just going to sieve out right now, actually, while we're talking. And that's just going to go straight back into the bowl and then into the batter in a second. So I've actually skinned the eggplant, sort of the purple skin. You don't have to, you can totally leave it on, but that's what I have there. So those are the three things. Now I'm gonna just quickly switch cameras, because it may be easier for you to see me from the top. There we go. Is that easier for folks to see me? I'm just gonna maybe move this.
It looks really good, that angle.
Yeah, easy.
Yep.
So let's do it this way then. So I mentioned the onions, so they're just going to go, or rather the shallots, they're just going to go straight in. Now I'm going to use a fork, because again, as I mentioned before, it's going to help just break stuff up as you're sort of mixing the batter together, because you do want it in bite-sized forms. And I've roughly chopped this up, but it can always go a little bit smaller. And as I do that, I'm going to go in with the 3 teaspoons of salt. And just kind of mix that in. And then I'm going to go in with the aromatics, and then over time I'll switch over to a spatula and mix everything else in as well. The other thing, doing this with salt also pulls out some of the water from the actual vegetable first, so that it again starts to mix with the batter. That way it cooks better. So if you say, for example, didn't put as much salt in at the beginning, because that's what salt does, it pulls water out of stuff. So if you left it to the end, it's just your batter is gonna be really runny if you make it runny, but then also the vegetables will start to kick out water inside the frying pan, which is not ideal. We want that to happen outside so we can kind of reduce the amount of moisture and use that moisture as the basis for the batter instead. So it cooks better as well.
Rash, I hadn't actually heard of soaking eggplant in salted water.
Oh.
The instructions I got given from someone when I was quite young was when you cut it, then you sprinkle it with salt,
Yeah,
and you let it sit for a bit, and then you rinse it off. So is that
yes.
the sort of the same thing? They told me it was for the bitterness.
Correct. It is for the bitterness
is?
and for the color. Yeah. So the salt basically pulls out the bitterness from eggplant, particularly the seeds in the center. So absolutely perfect to do that with roasting eggplant. So you don't want to be soaking eggplant in water if you're going to roast it. So that's the better option for roasting or grilling. Whereas, again, this is more of a Thai tip where they typically will stir fry it. So when you're stir frying it, the water kind of becomes a non-issue. And that's when you do soak it in salt water, especially when you've chopped it up, because then it covers more area. So for example, if you have to put a lot more salt onto the chopped up eggplants to kind of get it properly covered to pull out the bitterness, as well as not have it turn brown, instead of if you just had salt water for it to sit in. So again, big slices, because I used to love growing up having just cut the eggplants half lengthways for the longer Lebanese style eggplant, sprinkle salt on top, and then just fry it on either side. And that's brilliant, just so good. But those situations, again, frying it, you wouldn't, if you're frying it directly, you wouldn't want to put in water. Here we're making batter, so it works. So if you're stir frying or mixing it into a batter, salt water is good. Otherwise, what you said, Kathy, is the better option, especially if you're grilling or baking or frying. But yeah, there you go.
And Romy's just asked what was the flour, and Nancy said she thinks it's rice flour. Is that correct, to make it crispy?
That's it. Yes. Or corn flour. Although rice is probably up there. Like rice just has that crispiness to it in terms of any fritter that I make. So there's this other Malaysian fritter called chuchur, which basically you can do with bananas or prawns or anything. You can make it savory or sweet. The base for that is rice flour. So that is like a must-have for a crunchy snack if you like. So I just put the ginger and garlic in. I'm going to actually switch over now to just the spatula. I'm going to go in next with the chilies. That's all of them as well. It's going in. And as I add things, I'm just going to try and mix it in as best I can, get that salt covering everything as we go. And you can already, I don't know if you can, maybe you can't see it, but the whole mix is starting. I'm putting more things in and it's not increasing in size because it's pulling the water out, and that's what we want. So that's gone in. Now I'm going to do the mint and the coriander together. And that's it for all the base ingredients. And then we'll start putting probably start with the potatoes next. So it's just got a really lovely color as well, green and red, and I suppose that's purple, maybe lavender. I've just got the oil starting to heat up on a very low heat, just because I don't want it to get too hot. I'll pump up the heat when we're getting closer to the batter being made. Now I've got a shallow pan, and I've got, kind of maybe an inch worth of oil. That's not the traditional way to make it. The traditional way to make it is to have like a big wok and to have it sort of, you almost want the pakoras swimming in the oil. That's how you make it traditionally. But I'm conscious of not wanting to use too much oil just from a wastage perspective, but then also, trying to shallow fry it so that it, doesn't have too much oil all over it. So we'll come back to that in a second. We'll talk through that as we work through that. Now I'm going to go in with the potatoes next, just all of them in there. And you'll see here, I've shredded it. So typically with pakoras, shredding is probably the most preferred way to prepare your vegetables. But I've got all three today. So I've got shredded potatoes, I've got chopped spinach, and then I've got cubed, very, very small cubed eggplant. You can use all of them, but the pakora shape usually is best when you shred. So whether you're using, like, you can even use broccoli florets, and you can cut it up, or cauliflower florets, cut it up into little like rice bites. That's perfect. You can pretty much, again, use anything in the fridge. You can use sweet potatoes instead of just regular potatoes. I even experimented with French beans or long beans the other day, cutting them up really, really small. You can use, I'm using spinach, but nothing to say that you can't. This is where it starts to move into Western vegetables, but silver beet and kale and all those other types of vegetables. Once you mix it in with the batter and the spice, it kind of all mostly taste the same in terms of the vegetable. It's just more the texture that will vary because of the type of vegetable you put in. So that's all nicely mixed. Go ahead, Kathy.
And when you say shredded, could you
Mm-hmm.
grate it?
Yeah, I used it like one of those, those cheese graters, the ones that have 4 walls, just the one that you would use for cheese. Yeah, that's it. That's what I did with the potatoes.
And Danny's just asking what oil you're using.
I'm just using canola oil, vegetable oil. You can use olive oil, but just note that when you use olive oil, it will impart the olive flavor. But you basically want odorless oil. And because we're doing it vegan style today, I'm not using ghee. You can always put ghee in there, not only ghee, but put some ghee in there to give it some creaminess if you're not vegan. That's totally cool because ghee's actually got a really high cooking temperature. So it actually works really well as a frying oil, except that it's not necessarily cheap. So you don't want to use just ghee. So
you're not going to be deep frying with it, that's for sure.
Well, not entirely, but like even when we make gulab jamuns, for example, and you have to fry the gulab jamun balls, that's typically fried in almost not entirely ghee, but a lot of ghee, because you want that creaminess because it's more of a dessert dish. Whereas here, because it's pakora, not like, you could totally skip it if you want to kind of have a budget snack rather than trying to use ghee. But yeah, odorless oil is best for this. So that's with the spinach gone in there. And now I'm just going to go in, just try and get most of the water out of the eggplant. And that's going to go in as well. And
Midori's just asked what pakora means. So it means fritter, is that correct?
Yeah, Indian fritters, Indian fried snack, translated from Hindi. That would be the term. Yeah, so here we go. We've got a very sort of wet batter, which is cool. So that salt's really gone to town on the batter. And we are good to go now back to the dry batter that we mixed before.
Yeah.
I'm
just have a quick question before you do that. Do you squeeze excess liquid out of the potatoes as one does with latkes, or leave it in the batter?
I have not taken it out for 2 reasons. One, I need to add water to the batter anyway, so it just kind of becomes the water that gets added to potato starch.
Tomato.
Makes potato starch actually makes it crispy, because if you didn't have rice flour, you could also use potato starch. So it's basically you're using a starch for that crispiness. So it would be a waste. Unlike latkes, is it latkes? The Jewish snack. I may not be pronouncing it correctly, but for that one, because they're doing a dry sort of almost pancake style potato pancakes, you definitely want to pull out all that water. So it's different that way. But good question. Cross-cultural question. Love it.
Definitely. It sounds a bit like the ones my mum used to make, where she would grate the potato up and and after you've washed it, she'd wrap it in a clean tea towel to soak all the water out of it, and it would go into a batter to make potato cakes. But you wouldn't cook the potatoes first. But I don't know anything more other than that they were delicious.
I mean, I've seen people use zucchinis to make muffins, for example. So you'd squeeze a lot of because zucchinis are very watery, and that would be a good tip here. You could totally use zucchinis, but again, be mindful of that. It's probably the most watery of most vegetables. But yeah, that's where you would want to definitely take out the water. If not for pakoras, but in general, when you were making the muffins or whatever it was, because that's just going to make it really soggy, which would be very unfortunate. But yeah, so as you can see, I have gone in with the batter and I haven't even added any water yet, and I've gone in with half the batter and it's already sort of mixing in there without needing water. And so that's where I've put I have a cup of water on standby, but I probably won't use all of it just based on the type of vegetables I've used today. Spinach is quite watery. Potatoes cubed are not as watery as potatoes shredded. So even if you're using the same vegetable, depending on how you slice it up, could change how much water comes out of it. But yeah, so there you go. So I'm going to just go ahead and throw the rest of the batter in. Now I've actually gone with probably closer to 1.5 ratio of batter to the vegetables. So I would typically just do 100 grams of chickpea or basin flour, 50 grams of rice flour, etc., 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 2 teaspoons of salt. And the reason, and you can adjust that batter along with the spices based on how sort of how much batter you want. So if you just want enough batter to hold everything together, then what I just said would make sense. 100 grams of besan or chickpea flour, 50 grams of rice flour, 2 teaspoons of baking soda, and 2 teaspoons of salt, and then reduce some of the spices that I went through as well, drop it down all to 1 teaspoon. But I've gone up today because I just thought it'd be fun to see sort of pakora made the traditional way. Pakora made the traditional way has a lot of batter in it, but it shouldn't be runny batter, but it's got more batter than vegetable. And so that's where, with the second batch of flour that's gone in, you'll see that now it's going to need water. And that's why I did it in 2 batches. So it gave it a chance to kind of do double absorption, if you like. So I'm going to start with the water that I have in front of me. I'm going to go in with 1/4 cup at a time. So I've got a total of 1 cup in there. And I'm just going to kind of gradually add it in that way, because then I can control the amount that's gone in and not have it become too watery. Now, if you don't have pomegranate powder or mango powder and you decided to use lime juice, now would be the time to add it. So you want to make sure you don't add it at the end, because that's just going to make it very watery. So even if you were going to go ahead and use pomegranate syrup, for example, with that lime juice, now's the time to mix it in, because then you get the opportunity to make sure that you don't go, oops, I forgot the lime juice. Oh, now I got to add more flour to make it thicker, and just, you don't want that sort of a problem. So, because then if you just add flour on its own without anything else, it may not be as crispy, because the baking powder needs to be there to allow it to fry properly. And also, besan is quite tasteless. So when you start adding that without the spices and the salt, your pakoras aren't going to taste as nice, which is not, again, a fun place to be. If you want, you can always sort of give the batter a taste if you don't mind doing that. But yeah, raw batter is always fun when it's chocolate cake, but I'm not sure if it's pakora, maybe not so much. But if you follow the ratios I gave you guys, you'll be fine. You won't need to do a taste for the larger pot.
For those who've just come in, what was the ratios again?
So 150 grams so I'm going to go with the flour and the spices. 150 grams of flour, and that's the besan flour. 75 grams of the rice flour, and then we've got 3 teaspoons of salt and 3 teaspoons of baking powder. That's the postman. Don't mind that. And then for the spices, it was. Let me just see if I can keep myself honest with this guy here. So
that was the circle one, wasn't it?
The plate, that's right. So we had about 2 teaspoons of garam masala, 2 teaspoons. So I had 1.5. Sorry, let me try that again. So we had 1.5 teaspoons of carom seeds, or ajwain seeds, and we had, and going in that circle, we had 3 teaspoons of garam masala powder. We had 1.5 teaspoons of turmeric powder and 1.5 teaspoons of mango powder, or dry pomegranate powder, or lime juice later on. You could even throw in tamarind paste if you have that. That's a great alternative, because it adds, again, to the wet batter, but you'd adjust it. So even though it's going into the wet batter, if you were going to use more flour or spice, you would also adjust the lime juice and tamarind. So we've covered, and then the fenugreek leaves, so that I did about 3 teaspoons of that. You could just use like a pinch of fenugreek powder will do the trick if you don't have fenugreek leaves. And yeah, so those are the ratios I used today. So if you want to go up or down, you just kind of divide or multiply, but you kind of, today's the ratios I gave you is 1.5. So you can drop back down to 1 or go up to 2, depending on how battery you want it. But yeah, hopefully you can see my bowl still. I'm gonna stop screen share and just reshare it just for a second, because I've lost the ability to see what I'm sharing with you. Yeah, so I'm just gonna actually do it here really quickly. This is probably a decent consistency now in terms of the batter. I can add a little bit more water, but it's starting to, I'm conscious that there's still water coming out of the vegetables. I'm gonna make it now, so it shouldn't be a problem. But any more than that, and you're gonna be, your fritters are gonna become like really, it'll spread in the oil, and that's just not fun. Yes, it'll splatter. That's the word. Thank you. And also become like little pakora bits instead of one big pakora fritter. So yeah.
Dennis just asked, if you use tamarind paste, how much would you recommend? 1 teaspoon?
Yeah, one for one. So for the amchur powder, the dry pomegranate, just a teaspoon. I think I said one and a half, right? So I'd use 1.5 of the tamarind paste, not the tamarind water. So if you buy the fruit and you mix that into the water and you want to extract the juice and throw the seeds away, that concentration is lower, so you need to use more and adjust your water. So that probably you're looking at 3 teaspoons, because when you water down the seed, it actually has again, depending on how much water you use, but tamarind paste, as you know, is quite concentrated. So you just need to lick the batter if you're not sure. But yeah, anywhere between 1.5 to 3 teaspoons of that, depending on how thick the paste is when you make it with the seeds. All right. Any other questions?
I don't have any more in the chat, but if you have any questions, pop them in and we'll get through them.
We will. We'll do our best. All right. Now, I have actually made a mint chutney today. So I've thrown mint in here anyway, because I don't mind mint in here. But if you wanted to omit mint because if you were going to serve it with mint chutney, you're more than welcome to do that. But yes, I just thought I'd call that out. I'll show you the mint chutney later. And then I believe I'll be posting up that recipe later on this week on my social media channel, just because I was conscious we would not have enough time to get through everything today. But yeah, so this oil has been heating up. Let me just switch cameras. All right, so I'm going to go in. I have a slightly bigger than a tablespoon, like it's almost like a ladle tablespoon, because I want like a nice big fritter. My oil is hot, it's already steaming, so I've dropped the heat down. What typically happens is I get the oil to a certain temperature, then I drop it to medium heat and keep it going. I'm cooking it on one side for about 5 minutes. And you need to keep an eye on it. You don't want it to burn. It burns very easily. So the reason I get the heat up to a certain, so oil up to a certain heat, is because I want it to be hot. And then after that, I kind of want to just maintain it at an even keel. So from time to time, I'll kick it back up to just reheat it and then kind of keep it at that low heat. But yes, so here we go with the first tablespoon's worth. Bear with me with the noise. Actually, not so bad with the noise.
Oh, it looks spectacular.
So that's the first one, and then I'm gonna do 3 at a time. And I may not do all of it today, just because there's gonna be quite a bit of batter. But what I did there, as you probably saw, is I did not put the spoon into the oil. I put it basically on top of the oil, and I just kept dropping the batter on top of itself, and it'll take its own shape in the oil. And that way I don't have to worry about fried batter on my spoon. I'll show that to you one more time. That's it going in here. That's all that water that when you first drop it in, that's really, really strong. This guy is actually cooking really, really fast. I think this oil is pretty hot, so I'm just gonna flip them over.
And Romy's just asked, is it 1 tablespoon of garlic and 1 tablespoon of ginger?
It's half. So 1 in total. So you can even get those garlic ginger bottles these days, all mixed together. So 1 tablespoon of those, or else half of each. And I've actually probably gone more like 3/4 of each, because I don't mind it. But yes, so that oil was really hot. This guy's already done. The one that I put in first. So yeah, so it actually doesn't take long to make. I think when I was making it the other day, I was cautiously using a very low heat. So there you go, first one out.
Yum, it's making me hungry.
Yeah.
Nancy was saying a little bit further back, Nancy was saying that she found that the raw besan batter is not a pleasant taste either.
No, it tastes like chalky sort of weirdness, for lack of a better term. Yeah, it's not the best. Not the best. Most flours, to be honest, don't taste really good unless you've actually got. Let me grab those guys out.
All the yummy stuff added to them.
Yes, those are the fun bits for the chef, by the way. They'll always be like stray away batter, I call it. And those will be the ones that you can eat while you make it. So I've dropped the heat down. I'm going to pull it back up, take this guy out and put another batch in. But that's basically it, guys. You can eat it immediately, depending on your tolerance for heat. If I mean, you can ask my mom, but my sister will be at the wok pulling it out as it comes out, whereas I'll be all like waiting to have it in a civilized fashion with mint chutney and tea, because it is a tea time snack. Typically, in terms of when it's served, it's not a breakfast snack or anything like that. It's one that, you know, Indians love to have tea, and we'll come back, we'll sit down, and this will be the thing that we have with. So I am going to wait for that oil to heat back up slightly. I didn't realize that the heat actually went off altogether. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any more questions. But otherwise, what I've got here is I'm just sort of sitting it on the side. I might actually put him in front here so you can see it. But I've just got him sitting to get the oil out, and then we'll be able to serve it up. Really simple, really quick. I was going to quickly show you guys, well, I'm going to quickly finish with this. So this is the mint chutney that I mentioned. So let me just do two things. One, this is the color of Pakora, just straight up in terms of, hopefully you can see it, but it's golden. You know, I think one in here is maybe a little bit darker than that because it went in, then the oil was a little bit hot, but that's the color you're looking at. It's a golden color, you know, and it's a combination of the garam masala, the turmeric, and the basin being cooked at a certain temperature. And so as you cook it, you just want to make sure it doesn't go darker than that. As soon as it's starting to get close to that color, flip it. Or if you've got enough oil, pull it out because it's cooked all the way through. Everything's been cut really small or shredded, so it shouldn't take long to cook at all. It's more about making sure that the batter is cooked because, as you guys have all pointed out, for those who've tasted basin, it doesn't taste very good. So you just want to make sure it's cooked all the way and not soggy on the inside. So that's that. This is the mint chutney that I mentioned. So I've just got it sitting in a little bowl. Now, I've just, as I mentioned, have not used milk or anything like that, which is why it's darker. If you did put milk product or coconut yogurt or anything else like that, it'd be a lighter mint chutney, but I prefer it this way. And we have it served with the pakoras. Here, grab a cooking tong. And there you go. I'm just going to serve this up to my partner and myself for, I suppose, lunch, but yes. So you wait for the oil to drain out, and then it's pretty much ready to go. And it's a great thing to have even when you are entertaining in terms of just a fun snack for everyone before you sit down for the main meal. So there you go, pakoras with mint chutney.